Hi, hi. Lovely to be with you again. It's 8 o'clock on Monday, and here we are together. And just type in if you can, just to make sure that I've got the right, I'm in the right place at the right time. Type in, if you will, just where you are, just so I know. Just say hi, and then I know I'm not alone, because I could be alone speaking to nobody. But here already I can see Calgary in Canada. Hooray! Great, thank you. Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. Now, if you, let me just get this right. Here we go. If you were walking in Somerset and you came to a hillside, a strange looking hill, and you walked onto that hill, you might see some people gathered around in a circle. And, oh, we've got Australia here. Hooray, Liverpool, Delaware, marvelous, marvelous. Gradually, people are gathering around. And what I'm suggesting is now this idea of you're out walking and you find yourself on top of a hill. And I'm telling you this story because I'm aware that about hundreds of us meet together now for these informal chats on a Monday evening. Last time, actually 1,200, I think, people who were live all over the world. So there was this wonderful sense of community and connection. And then over the course of the week, up to sort of 7,000 people get to view it. So what I want to do is I want to say something that's meaningful for those of us who are gathered here right now on the Monday evening, but that also makes sense if you happen to come across this video by wandering about on the internet. You know, the way you get those recommended videos on the side when you're looking at YouTube, because these go up on YouTube and they go up on my blog and so on. And an analogy came to me that relates to Druidry, which I wanted to share with you, which is this. So you're out walking in Somerset, you see a strange looking hill, you walk up to the top of the hill, there's a group of people, and you realize that there's a ceremony going on. You've stumbled upon a ceremony of the Druids on Glastonbury Tor. And so you look and you see that there's what seems to be an inner circle. There's a circle of people around who seem to know what they're doing. They're the initiates, if you like. And then there are people who are standing close in by that circle. And then you, or maybe other people, are kind of wondering, and you might drop in for a while, listen, see if it's your cup of tea, maybe get intrigued and stay, or maybe you wander off. And it occurred to me that that's kind of exactly what's happening here. Those of us who are here at the moment are like this kind of circle. And I say inner circle not from a kind of point of view of exclusivity, but just this is what it is, where people who have gathered here were either Druids or were interested in Druidry, or friends have recommended us to come. And just as in a Druid ceremony, you don't have to be a Druid to be in the circle. If you go with a friend who's a Druid, they'll welcome you into the circle. Everybody's welcomed into the circle. So you're focused on what's happening. But then there, of course, are people who are curious. They've heard about it, but they don't want to be in the circle. It's a bit like, you know, when you go to a talk and you don't want to sit in the front rows because you want to be able to sneak out if you don't like it, or you feel a little too kind of exposed if you sit at the front. So it's always funny when you're giving a talk in public. You'll see the way the front few rows tend to get be the last ones to fill up sometimes. So you know, you don't quite come into the circle, and you hang out, and that's totally understandable too. And then there's this third circle of people who are curious. And so I wanted to welcome everybody, whether you're just curious, whether you've just found this recording while you're roaming around on the internet, or whether you happen to be here because you are really interested in Druidry and made a point of coming here, or whether you're actually in the live session. everybody's welcome here. And there's a way you may be familiar with the symbol often for Druidry are 3 circles. And within that are 3 bars of light. And so these 3 circles we can imagine in this way. And wherever we are in a circle, we can allow ourselves to give ourselves a moment of settling, where we just perhaps close our eyes for a moment and just feel that we're coming to, now I'm going to change the image from a hilltop to a sacred grove, a clearing in the forest. This is where Druids like to meet, and where you feel the energy of the earth, and you just allow your tensions and worries just to drop away, everything that's been going on during the day, and just you breathe out and just let all the tensions drift into the earth. And at the same time, you feel the energy of the earth beneath you, rising up into you. You feel in tune with the earth, calm, that sense of calm and stability, groundedness and connection. And then your awareness moves to the trees around you, and you sense the trees. You might even be able to smell them, to sense their life, to feel their roots going deep down into the earth, their trunks and their branches and leaves high in the air. And you feel the protection of the trees, and you sense them as real living beings around you. And then you look up at the sky, and perhaps it's the night sky and the stars are coming out. And the air is fresh. And you take in a deep breath, and you breathe in the energy of the sky. And the energy of the sky meets the energy of the earth within the center of your being. And then you open your eyes, and I open my eyes, and I sense that we're all here together. And we're here because we're drawn to the big questions, drawn to the spiritual life, what it means to be alive on the earth today, and drawn to, because of an interest in the Druid tradition and what that has to offer. And last week, I talked about the way we teach Druidry in 3 grades, 3 schools of learning: the Bards, the Ovates, and the Druids. And last week we talked about the Bards, and this week I'd like to talk a little bit about the Ovate work. And the Ovate work is the one that many people want to get to straight away. They think, oh, why do we have to do this kind of music, poetry, storytelling stuff, when what I'm interested in is the magical power of plants and of trees, of stones and of stars, and this extraordinary idea that there's another world, an inner world that I can travel into, another world of shamanic journeying, of voyages in consciousness. Let's get stuck into that. But what I want to suggest to you is that there's a real reason why we start with working in the bardic grade. We start in the bardic grade, we start with the work of the bards, of storytelling, of building a sense of being part of a community and a tradition, and our opening a kind of treasure chest of myth and story, and coming to tune ourselves in to the seasons, starting to follow the 8 ceremonies every 6 weeks or so, the equinoxes and the solstices, the Celtic fire festivals. And what that is doing is it's giving us a sense of meaning and of structure. It's like, here is a structure. It's quite a loose structure, I think you'll find. But it's there. It's a structure, and it gives us a sense of meaning and of purpose, and a kind of richness of color and texture. We start to open to the magic of the old stories, and we open to the magic of our own story, the story of our lives. because then that creates just the right preparation for us to enter into the next stage, which is the ovate stage, which is where we actually leave the forest clearing, the grove that we've been working in, and we set forth into the forest. And so we allow structure and meaning to dissolve. You know, the alchemists talked about solve et coagula, coagulation and dissolution. This process that they used a metaphor of working with metals in order to find gold. But at a psychological level, what the alchemists are pointing to is the way in which in our lives we go through periods of consolidation, of firming up, if you like, where we feel safe and secure in the world and we get ourselves together and get oriented and all the rest of it. But then, surprise, surprise, something happens and we start to dissolve, we fall apart. Difficult things happen, we lose our bearings for a while. One of the great values of getting old is that you realize that it's a cyclical process, and that when you feel your life is falling apart, if you just hang on in there, stay with it, maybe follow a spiritual practice, and life comes back together again. But just when you think it's never going to fall apart again, it might fall apart. And there are all sorts of different ways that this can happen, different levels of intensity. And of course, sometimes it can be extremely distressing and troublesome. So I don't want to minimize that. And sometimes it can be very, very subtle at a subtle level. But this process of dissolution and consolidation or coagulation is happening all the time. In a sense, it's death and rebirth. It happens with the seasons, it happens with our bodies, it happens with our psyches. And it's happening in the Druid training too. So what happens in the ovate level is there's a period of dissolution where suddenly you're out in the forest. And of course, you've been adequately prepared by traveling in the bardic grade. And so you are able to work with this. Life changes around you. And you start to explore the other world. And now, what I want to suggest to you is this. You know, this idea of the other world, which is something that you find in all spiritual traditions. Some spiritual approaches are so keen on the other world that they de-emphasize this world. So there's this suggestion that either this world is a world of illusion and suffering and must be escaped from, or it's a temporary world that is problematic and that the real world is the other world. Druidry, I would suggest, offers a different approach, which is more holistic and which values all worlds and all realities. But the other world is seductive, and this is again why we need to be anchored in our identity in this present reality, in this physical world. And if the bardic world or the bardic training speaks to the heart, community, opening to the joy of story and of connection and of community, then I would like to suggest that the ovate grade actually works with the body. It's the level of the body because it works with ancestry and with the mystery of embodiment and disembodiment. These two concepts that seem so contrary, so different, but it's paradoxical. And as soon as you find a paradox or apparent opposites, you know you're onto something. So what I'd like to suggest is that with the ovate work, you are working with the paradox of the task being to become as fully embodied as you can be, to open to your DNA, to your ancestry, to what it means to be a creature of flesh and bone. But at the same time, to open to the extraordinary possibility that you can make journeys out of your body into another world. That's extraordinary. And for those of you who have undertaken these journeys, you'll know that they vary in intensity. Sometimes you wonder if it's your imagination, but other times extraordinary things happen. And this is the real magic of the ovate work, is that in one sense, your gaze penetrates the physical level even more. And you're working with stones and with plants, with the winds, with minerals and trees. And it's as if they have become more real, more solid, more physical than you had experienced them before. And likewise with your body, that you're becoming more in your skin, more secure in your body, more embodied, and yet at the same time, you're somehow becoming more free of it too. Chuck McGowan is saying, "You are of the earth, so be humble. Also, you are of the stars, so be brilliant." A lovely quote that I remember coming from somewhere. And that's exactly it. It's somehow really opening to this wonderful, magical sense that we are of the stars and of the earth. And what can happen is our dream life can intensify. And if you've created this solid foundation in the bardic world, you can always return to your bardic grove. It's not like you've left it and you can never return. You can make your way back in the forest to the warmth and the safety of the bardic grove. And there a small fire is burning in the center. There is your guide and guardian who you have come to know in the bardic grade. And you can rest there and be nourished within the bardic grove. And so let's take that as a thought maybe to work with in the coming week. And this idea too that Druidry is an embodied spirituality. It's very, very easy for the spiritual path to become one of denial, where one denies aspects of oneself, where one denies the body, and one tries quite out of a sincere desire to escape from the sufferings of life, which can be very intense. One tries to get away from it. But Druidry is an embodied spirituality. And I'll put up on my blog, I'll put the recording of this up, and I'll give a link to an article about what it means to be an embodied spirituality, written by a transpersonal psychologist. It goes quite deep, so it may be too deep. It's not necessary to go so deep, really. But for those of you who are interested and want to know what an embodied spirituality must be. But I think when we look back on the history of religion, we can see the terrible damage that has been wreaked by people who interpret the spiritual path as having to separate body from soul, separate the spiritual path from the physical. And we find that in the West, and we find that in the East. And there are, I think, cultural and social consequences of that, which have been very unfortunate. And Druidry is one of those spiritualities, the nature spiritualities, which attempt to offer an embodied spirituality. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to finish, and then I'm going to enjoy reading your comments. I'm seeing little, it's a huge distraction having these comments there. Hooligans from Derry and Port Rush, who let them in? Minnesota, Seattle, oh, it's lovely. And it's lovely to sense, I'll tell you what is fabulous, is, to sense that there are so many of us, if we sat down, I think, in a way, it's very easy to think that people are, what I'm saying is, if we sat down together in a room, we'd soon find, as I've done all over the world and traveling and meeting people, we find so much that we have in common and we think alike, and then the differences provide this wonderful perspective, like binocular vision. You know, here's my perspective, and I talk with you, and your perspective is slightly different. And hey presto, everything's in stereo vision instead of mono vision. So it's wonderful. And these conversations are really an attempt to do that as well. And so I'll enjoy reading your comments, and lots and lots of love. I hope you had a good week last week, and I hope next week is wonderful for you. And I look forward to seeing you again. And I'm going to get back to my daughter and her boyfriend, who've just come back from 2 months in New Zealand. So I'm keen to hear what about all their adventures and the excitement that they had. So goodbye, and see you again next week.